So my name's Aysah Dondlinger. I'm a master's student over at South Dakota State University. I'm in the Department of Natural Resource Management. So that's located there in the McFadden Biostress building there on campus. So like I said, a master's student, I'm in my second year of the program. And today I'm going to be talking about South Dakota urban and community fisheries. Specifically, I'm going to be covering more of our 2025 results. Like I said, this is kind of an ongoing project, so we do have one full year of results that I'm going to be talking about today, and we're continuing some of this stuff as we speak. And many of the results I'm going to be talking about today are going to be more broad overall, so looking at all lakes combined and then comparing some of that stuff between adult and youth anglers. And then I'll also have some Lake Ole specific information for you guys as well. And hopefully at the end of this, I'm going to be providing some really good insight into ways we can better, specifically game fish and parks can better manage these resources to better facilitate youth angler participation. So I'll go ahead and give you a little bit of background on why we're doing the projects, the issues that arose that are springing the interest here. So according to the Recreational Boating and Fishing Foundation, national angling participation rates, and as well and on a state level, many states saw a lot of angling participation declines leading up into 2020. So we know that we had the COVID-19 pandemic then, and people had a lot more time on their hands to go fishing. And some of those gains have actually carried over to today, and that's a really good thing. Now the issue is stabilizing angler participation on the other end. There's a thing called angler churn, which is really referring to how many years consecutively an angler will buy a license, or anglers who buy a license 1 year or participate 1 year and then don't participate the next year. Those churn in and out of the participation pool. And that's really highly attributed to urbanization trends. And so that's really the big issue now. Post-COVID-19 is stabilizing angler churn rates. We've seen some pretty bad youth participation declines in recent years, and they're really concerning to a lot of these state agencies that operate under a user pay benefit model. And what we mean by that is that hunters and anglers pay for licenses, and they are funding what we have in conservation. So hunters, anglers, shooting sports, and boaters alike are really the lifeblood of conservation in the United States, and that's what forms our model here in North America. So most of our urban and community fishing resources are managed to support local or nationwide efforts to recruit, retain, or reactivate anglers. Generally, they're stocked by state management agencies in urban areas, and they're really intended to reduce some of the constraints to participation and support fishing participation to a large proportion of potential anglers. And when you put those in urban areas, you're getting at just that. You're getting at a very large proportion of a very large population of people and a large proportion of people that potentially aren't already angling. So angler satisfaction is a common metric that fisheries managers use to evaluate whether or not a fishery is meeting the expectations of its anglers. It's a really common metric. You see those in almost every creel survey, almost every angler survey that's ever conducted. Fisheries managers are really trying to get down with that. Also, angler effort is used to evaluate the amount of time that's been invested by anglers on a particular water body over a particular amount of time. Both of those metrics together give us a lot of really good information, especially in regards to how to get more people out there. So there's a need to evaluate some of these specific drivers of angler satisfaction and effort in some of our urban and community fisheries so that we can better improve angler participation rates, especially youth participation here in South Dakota. So on the other hand, there's a need to evaluate how some of these fish communities respond to anglers and to stocking practices. And there's a need to evaluate how anglers respond to those stocking practices as well. So results of this study will really help South Dakota game fishing parks better manage these resources going forward, and really make some decisions that help support some of these efforts to recruit, reactivate, and retain anglers across the state. Furthermore, and probably most importantly, the goal of this is so that we can ensure a legacy of future fishing opportunities for generations to come. So I'm going to kind of break this down into the three sections I want to cover today. They're kind of the specific objectives of this study. So we're going to be talking about angler catch. We'll be talking about their effort, and then also going to be talking a little bit more about some of their group dynamics and kind of how all of those play in together. Then we'll move into angler satisfaction, demographics, some of their motives and preferences towards angling. And then finally, which is actually my personal favorite part, is we're going to be talking a little bit more about some of the youth anglers, what their constraints are, some of their transportation methods, how they're getting to these fishing areas, and some of the introduction pathways into fishing, and who or what really got them into this in the first place. So we've got 5 study ponds. We've got 2 of those ponds that are located in Brookings. If you look here on the map, this big lake here is Dakota Nature West. And so that pond is about 18.5 acres. And then the pond there just to the east of that is Dakota Nature East. And that pond is about that pond's about 5 acres. We also have 2 in Watertown as well. So we've got McLaughlin Nature Area, and then we've got 3rd Avenue Community Fishing Pond, or Lions Park, located there in Watertown. So McLaughlin Nature Area is about a 10.5 acre pond, and then 3rd Avenue is about 6.5. And then finally, we've got Lake Ole here in Harrisburg. Lake Ole is estimated about 3.5 hectares, give or take, depending on water level. But each one of our sites here really has a whole different context surrounding them. So Dakota Nature Park in Brookings has things like a trail, several parking lots. It's got 2 nature centers, an outdoor adventure center. It's got seating, it's got fishing piers, it's got fishing accesses located basically all around the pond. The same, you can say a lot about Lake Ole here in Harrisburg. You know, we have things like trails, seating, places that are, right there where you can go and fish next to the pond. We've got a dock out there as well. 3rd Avenue also has some of these things. But then McLaughlin Nature Area in Watertown really only has a dock. It doesn't have much in terms of parking or in terms of access. So Dakota Nature Park is kind of located near the outskirts of Brookings, you could say, not exactly located right near the population center. Whereas 3rd Avenue and Lake Ole, on the other hand, are located and situated right there next to where everybody's at. And as I go forward, I'll kind of help explain why some of that is very important. Each of these have a different number of access sites, a different number of amenities, and bathrooms are available on some of these, and on some of these they're not. So in 2025, we stocked 4 out of our 5 ponds. The one pond that was not stocked last year was Lake Ole. Lake Ole served as our control lake to really help evaluate some of these stocking effects on the fish community and on angler satisfaction and effort. So we stocked bass, bluegill, catfish. So our bass were around 12 inches. Channel catfish really had a good range of size. We got some of those that were getting pretty big, up in the 3-4 pound range. And then as well, we stocked bluegill, which we stocked those at a variety of sizes, but at catchable size. So in 2026, we stocked 3 out of our 5 ponds. So this year, Lake Ole was included, and we stocked that yesterday. So yesterday, Lake Ole got a bass bluegill stocking. And so going forward, what we're hoping to do is potentially get more catfish in there, but you will at least get another shot of bluegill here in June. So we stocked bluegill at roughly 63 fish per acre, and we stocked largemouth at about 9 fish per acre, and then channel catfish ranged anywhere between 12 and 18 fish per acre. So we also did fish community surveys. So we conducted spring fight net surveys both last year and this year. So we did that on all of our water bodies, so all 5 of those got Fike Net surveys. And then we conducted fall electrofishing surveys on 4 out of our 5 lakes. So Lake Ole did not get an electrofishing survey last year, but this was so that we could get recaptures of our bluegill. And if you look here on the picture, you kind of see us taking a fin clip of our bluegill up here. And so when we're doing that, we're doing more of a mark recapture survival estimate here. Specifically, we're evaluating these bluegill because they're raised in recirculating aquaculture systems. So long story short, this technology is relatively new in the fisheries realm. And we really like to use these systems so that we can grow fish fast and we can get bluegill like that to a catchable size a lot faster than what they would in a natural environment. So you can kind of see up here on the top right, you've got a picture of a Fike net, and then there on the bottom is us on the electrofishing boat, where we're getting at some of those centrarchid species like bass and bluegill. So really the whole goal of this in our fish communities is to really further evaluate that fish community, like I said, in response to stocking, but also in response to angler pressure over time. So in order for us to collect information from our adult anglers, we conducted on-site access point creel surveys. So we conducted this May 1st through September 1st of 2025, and we're doing that again this year as well. So we asked anglers questions surrounding their preferences, their motivations, satisfaction, travel, catch, and then we also measured things that they harvested as well. So meanwhile, while we're out there talking to anglers, we're also conducting hourly pressure counts. So we'll have physical technicians that are out there that are physically counting the total number of anglers, the number of adults, the number of children, and the number of people who are using different access sites. We also use trail cameras to help us do some of that. So on days when we're not there collecting those pressure counts, those trail cameras really help us monitor angler effort over time. And for our youth anglers that were between the ages of 12 and 17 years old, we collected information from them using a Qualtrics online survey. So while we're out there talking to adults doing those surveys, when we see a kid, we hand them a card with a QR code on it, just like up here, to basically take a very similar survey to the one that the adults just took. So we also had signs posted around the pond. If you go out to Lake Ole, you'll see 2 signs, one by the dock, one kind of by the seating area on the other side of the pond. And so these are also incentivized with a raffle. So we want to get kids out here to take these surveys, and to do so, we incentivize them with the chance to win some stuff like rod and reel combos, preloaded tackle boxes, went out and actually bought, lures and things that would be applicable to these resources so kids could go out and enjoy them as well. So let's kind of get into this first section of results here. And this first section is more speaking about angler catch, effort, and some of the group dynamics. And you'll see here on the picture, this is kind of the typical fishing pier that you have in most of our urban and community fisheries. Sometimes they're metal, but that T-shaped fishing pier is very common. So shore angling comprised like 99% of the total effort. So there is almost nobody out there in a kayak, in a boat, or any kind of vessel like that. 99% of our anglers are fishing from the shore. And most of those anglers were fishing on fishing piers. In fact, 49% of our total anglers among the 5 other options were fishing from a fishing pier. So it's a really popular spot on these resources. And when we look at angler catch, this is the total estimated catch by lake and species. Now this is an estimate that is based off of our angler effort estimates, but generally catch rates were highest surrounding our stocking events and then tended to taper off over time. So immediately after, people were catching a lot of fish, and over time, those catch rates started to drop consistently until we stocked again, and we get another bump in catch rates. So rainbow trout catch rates were actually very, very high, even in late May. And we saw this out on Dakota Nature Park, where it was only stocked in for that fall trout stocking, and yet all of those fish survived, and those catch rates maintained all the way until the next May. And at that point, water temperatures had gotten too warm for those fish to survive in those resources. So we really saw little to no observed harvest in most of our lakes. And those that were harvested were mostly small bluegill that people used for bait. And they reported wanting to go and to catch catfish with those on other places. And really most of that was happening here at Lake Ole. We saw a lot of people would go and catch small bluegill so that they can go fish places like the Big Sioux to catch catfish. So lakes that are marked here in blue were stocked are 4 out of our 5 ponds, so not Lake Ole, that were stocked in 2025. But despite Lake Ole not being stocked in 2025, it had the highest estimated catch rates. And that's a big deal, right? I mean, these places already had existing fish communities prior to stocking, but that's a pretty big biological investment, even if catch rates are going to be higher at a place that you didn't stock. On this graph, we've got our total estimated angling effort by lake, and then we compare this between our adult and youth anglers. Highlighted there in yellow is Lake Ole. So overall, we saw an estimated over 19,000 angler hours dedicated towards these fisheries between May 1st and September 1st. And people were spending on average about 2.3 hours per trip. So there's quite a bit of investment, when they're going there. They're also spending a considerable amount of time there as well. The one thing we did not see is we saw no significant difference in angler effort among adult and youth anglers overall. So combined, there was no significant difference. And I'll just kind of explain why that's a really big deal. But Lake Ole did have a very big difference in adult and youth angler effort. Overall, youth angling effort was greater, but on a broad level, why are these resources not attracting a much larger proportion of youth anglers compared to adult anglers? Right? I mean, that's the point of these. We want these resources to attract kids. We want to be able to recruit those kids into fishing participation. So why are kids not showing up in much greater amounts than adults? So 87% of our kids reported fishing alongside somebody else. So very few of them were there fishing alone. In fact, only 13% of those kids showed up alone. The average adult angler party size was 2.41 anglers, but 50% of those adults were fishing with kids. So that's a pretty big deal, right? We look at total angling effort, and why aren't these things significantly different? Well, those kids are coming with their parents, right? And an adult angler effort and youth angler effort are very tied. So for Lake Stockton 2025, on this graph, we have our estimated daily angling effort. And then we divided this between times before we stocked and after we stocked. So we had our stocking periods here. What we saw was no significant difference in angler effort before and after stocking. Despite there being there was a significant difference in catch rates, there wasn't a significant difference in angler effort. There was a significant increase in youth angler effort, specifically in the first stocking event, between the pre-stocking and the first stocking event, but that's also the time period when kids get out of school. And so at that time, you would expect if they have more time on their hands, that their effort would not be so tied to adult angler effort. But all of this is important, right? I mean, we put this into context of some of our other lakes that potentially don't have as many access points, maybe don't have as many of amenities, and are probably located a little bit further away from population centers. And then we also see again that adult and youth angling effort is basically tied together, right? And youth are very much dependent on adults. So let's kind of go into our second section here. And here at the end, I'll kind of help tie some of all this together. But for now, let's kind of talk a little bit about angler satisfaction, their demographics, some of their motives and their preferences towards their angling participation. So first and foremost, I want to talk about angler satisfaction and what's really driving satisfaction on a day-to-day basis. So what we saw was no significant difference in angler satisfaction rates between our stocking periods. But we did, again, see significant differences in catch rates. So why would that be? Well, people were already reporting high satisfaction rates from the get-go, right? So if you have most of those anglers who are already satisfied with the resource, you're not going to get much a significant difference over time. Adult anglers, we don't have a great model at the moment on predicting what really drives their satisfaction, but for youth anglers, we do. And so for our youth anglers, we see that their satisfaction is driven by the number of fish that they catch. That's not super surprising, right? So if a kid is satisfied with the number of fish that they caught, they're almost 9 times as likely to report that they're overall satisfied with their fishing experience. When we look at our age distribution of our adults, and so I'll put this in a note, this is only anglers who have actually responded to our surveys. So just take that with a grain of salt, right? So our adult median age was about 32 and a half years old. That's relatively young when you look at it on a statewide basis, but then our youth median age was 13 years old. Again, that is only anglers who responded to our surveys, and we targeted kids who were between 12 and 17. But overall, we have a very young age distribution. We look at that with our youth anglers as well. It's very much skewed towards our youth, the younger they are. And we also have a lot of middle to even young parents out here bringing their kids. So let's look at the species preferences. What are people really wanting to catch out here, right? When we look at this graph and this is species preferences and comparing them between adult and youth anglers. What we see here for our adult anglers is that 56% of them are there to catch anything that bites. They don't have a specific species that they're there to target, right? They're there to fish with their kids. They're there to have a good time. On the other hand, kids are overwhelmingly wanting to catch largemouth bass compared to other things. And then that's also followed by our rainbow trout, northern pike, bluegill, and channel catfish. And you'll see that the largemouth, the bluegill, and the channel catfish were the actual stocking products for this project, but rainbow trout are stocked seasonally, right? And people still want to target those even in months when they're really not even available. So when we asked our anglers what features would make it more likely for you to return at this particular water body, so we'd ask anglers, are there any amenities, are there any features, anything at all that would make it more likely for you to want to come back to fish at Lake Ole? So adults responded with they would prefer features. Actually the majority of them didn't have a specific feature that'd make it more likely for them to come back. But those that did really liked things like bathrooms and fishing piers. And those two things seem to be pretty important if we're talking about amenities and features that make it more likely to come back. Our youth were a lot different in their responses though. Youth anglers would rather return to a place that's stocked with their preferred fish species. They'd rather come back to a place that has a fishing pier. And they'd like to come back to a place that hosts things like fishing tournaments, fishing clinics, fishing programming events, things like that. And we also asked our anglers, Well, where are you getting most of your fishing related information? What is your preference when it comes to information sources when it comes to fishing? And what we see is, not surprisingly, that both adult and youth anglers are getting their fishing related information from online videos. So YouTube is a big deal, right? And if we're trying to push out fishing related information, if we're trying to potentially help kids overcome knowledge gaps that might be a constraint towards their participation, YouTube is a really good resource for us. And that's followed by things like social media content, maps, magazine article, books, and physical demonstrations. And really, this isn't a very surprising result, right? We look at our age demographic, it's a lot of kids, and it's a lot of younger adults that are out there using those resources. And then when we asked our anglers, why did you choose to go fishing today? So for our adults, they mostly went because they have time, it's nice out, to spend time with their kids and to have a good time. And that actually pans out in the data, right? And that's not super surprising, but it really helps paint a picture on why these people would continue to show up on a day-to-day basis, right? On the other hand, kids went because there was someplace close to go. And proximity was a huge reason why kids chose to get up and go fishing on a day-to-day basis. They also chose to go because they wanted to catch a particular species. And when we look at our species preferences, we see that they want to go to catch things like largemouth bass. And then on the other hand, they want to go there to spend time with their family and friends, right? And that's actually very similar to what we see with our adults, right? This is more of a social activity. So I'm going to go ahead and transition right into my favorite part, which is where we're going to talk about our youth anglers. We're going to talk about their constraints, how they're getting around to these fishing locations, and who or what really got them into it in the first place. And I think this will really help paint the picture and help me transition into more of the management implications so that it's easy for everybody to understand where I'm coming from here. So we asked kids about their constraints towards fishing. We asked them, what would make you not, what are the reasons you couldn't go fishing, right? What is keeping you from going fishing, if anything? Time and weather come up as number 1 and 2, not surprising. Those are always the top constraints when it comes to fishing participation on a daily level, right? We also have a good number of those kids that don't have a perceived constraint. But we have a few red flags that came up here in the data. Proximity and transportation is not surprising, right? And when we look at the rest of these results and how tied youth angler effort is to their parents and to other adults, that's really not surprising. But the biggest red flag here is support. So that is family support. So 46% of those kids still rely on somebody else to get them to the fishing pond, right? And we surveyed kids that were between the ages of 12 to 17. So that's still not even the older, or that's the older age of our kids, right? And when we start talking about even younger than that, that's even more likely the case that they're going to be relying on somebody else to get them there. And so most of our anglers are really coming from less than 5 miles away. It's a pretty local resource for a lot of these people. However, we are getting some individuals who are coming from more than 40 miles away, and when we look at youth anglers, that's more than likely our older individuals or people visiting from out of town to see family and to take advantage of those opportunities while they're in town. And so when we asked our kids, who or what introduced you to fishing in the first place, we see that a parent, a grandparent, or some other immediate family member are by far the biggest pool of people that we have to get kids into fishing. It's overwhelmingly a very much family-related activity. And these parents and these family members are really what are getting our kids into fishing in the first place. And I think that this really drives home some of the main points here. So I think this really drives home the importance of family management, family-oriented management strategies. So both adult and youth anglers spend their time out there so that they can spend time with family, to spend time with friends, and it's very much a social activity, right? Youth participation is tightly linked to adult effort, and family members can both facilitate and constrain participation. So younger anglers often rely on their parents to shape and guide their experience, to get them to the fishing pond, and the reaction of the parents usually helps shape whether or not that angler continues to be a lifelong angler. So what's really driving youth participation? Well, many of our anglers are generalists, but our youth show a pretty strong preference for largemouth bass, and youth satisfaction is linked to the number of fish caught. But stocking and higher catch rates alone do not increase effort or satisfaction. And stocking alone in a biological investment is not getting more kids who aren't already interested in fishing to participate. So what does this all mean? So many of our youth motives and their constraints are shaped by whether or not there's a pond close by to go to, and whether or not they have the availability of their family support. So ultimately, management should focus on more simple summertime stocking regimes. And it's not always just about a biological investment. And to focus more on resources that are close to home, right? And tackling some of these constraints to participation in the first place. And what these resources seem to be doing are a really good job of retention. And the kids that are there, they're already happy. The parents that are there, they're already happy. But I think they could do a better job of helping out with recruitment overall. So growing youth participation really isn't only about managing a fishing pond or a fish population. It's really about managing for the conditions that make it easy for families to go fishing together. So where are we currently? So as of right now, I'm working with educators across the state on more of an email-based survey. So really this is just a round of heads down, thumbs up, where the teacher asks the kids, how many of you have been fishing in the last year? It's really supposed to help with some of that bias. You know, we don't want kids just raising their hand because their friend did. But this is really crucial information for us to get at whether or not these urban and community fishing resources are really making an overall impact on participation rates across the state. So we conducted our Fight Net surveys this spring. We did it at all 5 study ponds again. Angler surveys are continuing throughout the summer. I'm sure you guys will see me over at Lake Ole talking to you guys. And then we'll also do our electrofishing surveys in the fall. And we had our first stocking event yesterday over at Lake Ole. So make sure to go out and enjoy those fish. So I do want to acknowledge my funding sources here. So this project is funded by South Dakota Game Fish and Parks. I'd really like to give a shout out to a lot of the grad students over at the Natural Resource Management Department. Without all the hands on deck, a lot of this wouldn't be possible. Without a lot of the help from South Dakota Game Fish and Parks staff, management, research, and hatchery staff have really been crucial in getting this project done. And then I'd like to give a shout out to all of the undergrads who helped me along the way, who really gained some good experience and were really pivotal to the project along the way. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. My email, I will make sure to get that to Magenta, just in case any of you guys have questions. If you want to reach out, feel free. I'm always here to answer some of those. So thank you guys and have a good day.